mentioned that this has not been done in the sport of swimming, period, based on modern events. So, and by modern swimming events. So I mean, a person would need to have won medals in at least 10 events. At least based on the sources I checked, that has not been done. And to be more than half of the 19 events currently offered per gender in the Olympic Games in swimming. So what sport has it been and achieved? And it was actually first achieved in fencing and I'm going to say like at a really high level. So like the highest level, and this is the highest level that I could find. So in fencing, and this happened twice. There's no swimmers who has done this, who's gotten 50% of medaled in 50% of events currently offered at the Olympic Games. This has happened twice, not once, twice, with the same number of medals. And this is again based on the sources I looked at. So there might have been people who've actually reached 6 for 6, but fencing has 6 events. There's team foil, individual foil, team EP, individual EP, and team saber and individual saber. And so in 1920, Nedo Nadi from Italy won 5 out of 6 medals based on the current events at the Olympic Games in fencing. And I'm doing based on current events to make it fair, because current athletes have that to compete on. So I'm comparing old athletes to modern standards, and Nedo Nadi got over 83% of medals in the sport of fencing by modern standards, in modern offerings. And that was in 1920, so over 100 years ago this was achieved in fencing. And then 4 years later, in 1924, Roger Ducret of France, or Ducret, I think it's Ducret. I'm rusty on my French. I took French in college, but I only did like 101, so I apologize, and pronunciation was not my strong suit. So, but he's from France. He competed for France, Roger Ducret, in 1924, and he also won 5 of 6 fencing medals by modern offerings. And that's over 83% of the medals in the sport. And I realize there are certain sports that are covered more on TV and stuff like that, but it's just, this is really a glowing podcast of fencing dominance as a sport. And these athletes who at least one of them over 100 years ago achieved over 83% dominance in their sports by modern standards. And so it's really incredible. And to think about, yeah, there are sports that get a bunch of coverage on TV and stuff like that, but I'm choosing swimming because I have background with it, and it's not so much gymnastics. There are gymnasts who can get close to fencing and that kind of thing, the level, but swimming, it gets a bunch of time on TV and stuff like that. But it's kind of like, how come, like, I guess swimmers are inhibited, kind of. Where's that drive for kind of sport dominance? And there have been swimmers who've gone, but they don't compete in every event and stuff like that. And then there'll be big feuds about how good this swimmer is versus this swimmer. And it's kind of like, well, let's take a step back. And there were 19 freaking events and nobody's even hit half of that. Like in a medaling sense. And especially if you consider like a golden standard as the person having multiple gold medals. So that means they win 2 or more gold medals. If we included that as the standard, Nedo Nadi won at least 2 gold medals, so 2 or more gold medals as part of those 5 of 6 medals. And same with Roger Ducret. And it's just kind of, what's happening? Like, I guess swimming as a sport has expanded, but does that mean that the athletes' abilities have not? And then there are sports like fencing where, like, have the sport, like, athletes become less proficient because, like, where are the Nadis and Ducrets of today, kind of thing. Like, this was over 100 years ago, and then approximately 97 years ago that this happened for fencing. And so it's kind of, does that mean that since nobody modern times or past times by modern standards, and swimming has done it, and like we don't see fencers at this level, does this mean that athleticism and athletes at the Olympic Games as a whole are competing at a lower caliber than in the past? I don't know. I don't know. That it's a hot topic, and it's something that has definitely come up on a social level by those of us who watch. Is kind of like, why can't a swimmer get 10 medals? Like, they're already swimming these events, and like, I don't, but, and I think partially for swimming that's come up because people will be like, oh, the swimmer is so dominant in the sport, and it's like, they only competed in 7 or 8 events, like, and they're 19, like, gotta at least have 10. Where's the double digits, man? And maybe the double digits are coming, and just this new structure of swimming in so many events, it'll bring forth those swimmers, and they'll be perhaps different than swimmers of the past. It'd be fun to see fencers kind of, I think fencing there is so centered on respect. I can kind of see that there's this possibility that people don't want to displace Nadi or Ducret. Like, they're great, they're incredible, and they're still incredible by modern standards. And like, as someone who has fenced in my past, like, I don't want them to be lost. Like, they mean so much to the sport of fencing, and they've done such great things for it, and are prime examples of how good and how much mastery a fencer can develop for their sport. And so they're role models and inspiration for the present and the future, past, present, and future. And so it's just kind of, what's happened? But like, not really, because like, I think what's happened? Well, I think the Olympic Games have, the structure's changing, so more events are being added in some sports. Some sports have been cut. Like, I used to watch ice dancing at the Winter Olympic Games, and it's no longer, at least I checked for the 2022 Winter Olympic Games, and I don't think it's on the air anymore, and I'm like, I liked watching that. So some sports have been completely cut from the Olympic Games, and then other sports like swimming have a whole lot more. Like, 100 years from now, is swimming gonna get cut from the Olympic Games? I don't know. These are good, like, these are questions that have come up in, like, I'm a geologist and a physicist and mathematician, and this kind of stuff, like, we're a lot of the people. I mean, if you're an athlete, some athletes watch, but a lot of people compete. Like, athletes are competing, it's centered around athletes, so a bunch of the people who watch this are not athletes. So kind of the structure of the Olympic Games is driven, at least in part, by people who are not in these sports and who are competing at the level, or competing in sports, and period. And yeah, and we're just kind of sitting out going, what are these problems? And I think part of it is, so changing in offerings in sports is one of the problems, and one of the changes is changings in offerings for genders in the sport. So like, take boxing for example. Since boxing's been introduced for women, and I think it was 2012 if I'm remembering correctly, at the Olympic Games, the number of events offered to women has changed. And so it has not yet reached that stable, what is the long-term offering going to be, or is there going to be a stable long-term offering, or is it going to ebb and flow based on viewership or sport demand, but I don't know what that means, like, kind of thing. So yeah, so part of it's just making sports more inclusive. And so maybe we just need, like, as for everybody to compete, and as these sports are made more inclusive, some sports are completely cut from the program, that kind of thing. It's a turbulent time for the Olympic Games, and so we perhaps, I would guess there are sports, like, I think gymnastics is a pretty stable one for the achieving dominance of the sport, I think. And maybe shooting, but I don't know how many offerings there are in the sport of shooting. I just did fencing and swimming because these are two that I have some experience with, and I have followed at the Olympic level, and it followed the medal counts, and just kind of like, I still to this day, this sport, and this part of why I participated in it was just how, so I started, it would have been 2008 or 2009. After the 2008 Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, I actually started fencing. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. And for me, it was like, they were talking about how these people won all these gold medals and stuff, and I was like, yeah, but that doesn't mean, like, look at Nadi and Ducret. They won this, like, almost 100 years ago, man. And, like, they won 5 of 6 possible medals. And, like, swimmers ain't got nothing on that. Like, and it was just, yeah, and that those records still stand today. And that just speaks, like, and they're inspirational athletes and stuff like that. So, yeah, turbulent times. It'll be fun to watch if the Olympic Games continue. I know there's a bunch of like protests and stuff like that, and we felt that a bit. I live in Shoreline, Washington State, which is near Vancouver, Canada, where the 2010 Winter Olympic Games were held. And I know there's a bunch of pushback that people don't actually like the Olympic Games and the structure of the Olympic Games, and while there might, and kind of the drain it puts on natural resources in the area and local businesses and local infrastructure and stuff like that. And it can actually be very bad to the local host city. And so I know that there's the possibility that the modern Olympic Games might be discontinued. I mean, there was what, centuries that to thousands of years? I think it's centuries that the Greek Games, I think it was the Greek Games. Yeah, they didn't happen for a long time, and so it's possible the Olympic Games will completely go away again. That's entirely possible. And if they don't, then it'll be interesting to see, at least these two sports and fencing, will we get Nadis and Ducrets and people who are as good as they were people? And will we see even just one swimmer reach even 50% of the offerings of the sport? So they'd need 10 medals out of the 19 current events to do that. And maybe they're up and comers and they're just eyeing it, and future, you know, Dara Torres is going to come back and she's going to be like, yo, I got it in me, don't you worry, honeys. And that's probably not at all what she would say, but like that would be like dominance in sports and in age, and that would just be like snaps to that if that happens. But yeah, so that is a hot topic podcast on a dominant circuit in the sport of swimming, and this squirrel goes farewell. Kind of an abrupt ending, I know.